Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 215. I'm Enigmaeus, and today we were almost done. We finished the Discovery hybrid build, we released the blueprint, and that was going to be the end of this series. We're moving on, and I realized that there was one project that I had completely forgotten about that I had said I would take on, and it was something that I felt I should take on before I go, and that is a rework, an update of the block playground that I released a while back. Apparently it's one of my most popular Empyrion builds, and more than one person has expressed an interest in seeing something that's a little bit broader in scope and a little bit more fleshed out, and so that's what I've done. And you're not seeing double, there are actually two ships here, and I wanted to start off by just kind of pointing this out. There are two blueprints on the workshop right now for this ship. One is for the ship without thrusters, and it has a very small amount of equipment on it, basically just enough to keep the lights on. And then we've got another ship that's fully loaded with thrusters. It's fully mobile. It's sluggish. It turns like a pregnant whale, but it's mobile. That's the key. The reason why there's two is because I had actually built the one with the thrusters, and then I was thinking about it, and I realized with all these thrusters and the jet thrusters and all these different things that I had put on in order to make it mobile and do what it does, I had raised the level requirement in order to be able to build the blueprint, and that seemed counterproductive when we're talking about a tool that people can be using very early on in the game if they want to, even in a survival environment. So I stripped off most of the equipment. I got it from an unlock level of 20 down to an unlock level of 10, which unlock level of 10 is pretty straightforward. I don't think too many people will have a huge amount of difficulty reaching that, and it's just to make it a little bit more accessible. And then of course if a person builds this in their world and as they progress they want to add thrusters to it and make it mobile, they can do that. So there's a version of the ship with WT in the name with thrusters, and one with NT in the name, no thrusters, and it's included in the description of each item on the workshop, which is which, just so you know. So we're going to take a look at what these guys have to offer, and specifically we're going to take a look at the inside, but we're not going to do a detailed look at everything that's going on the inside. That's why you get the blueprint and you kind of meander around and you look at in detail at what's going on. But just to give you an idea of the basics, this module up top here, if you do get the one without thrusters and you do decide to start adding stuff, this is where I had hidden most of it on the with thrusters version. You can see we've got some fuel tanks and we've got a few RCS units, and there's some generators in there as well. You can put thrusters in here, you can put thrusters there, you can put more equipment down here if you want more generators, fuel capacity, whatever you want. So that's what this upper module here is for. The main entrance to the ship is in the very front, through this force field. I didn't put any oxygen services on the ship, but we've got the force field nevertheless. We've got steps or ramps, I guess, heading in the direction of the upper decks. This is where they are. And then we've got all of this glorious stuff on the main deck, and I included more LED panels to kind of describe exactly what's going on for people as they're walking their way through, just kind of quick blurbs explaining a little bit of this or that as is relevant. And it starts with the cube over here. All of the cells down here on the lower deck are numbered, and when I say cells, I mean I'm referring to the squares that are marked on the floor. I missed with the paint again. They're numbered, and then they go in rows, and then they're color coded as well. They change color as you move up, just to kind of help people keep track of where they are and where they're going if they're wanting to follow the flow that I've presented. But there's nothing to say that you can't just gravitate towards the things that interest you the most and proceed that way. It's just a sort of a thing that you can look at. So it starts with the cube, and it looks at a line, and then a 45-degree line, and then a 22.5-degree line without any embellishments. Obviously, we're not using any of the sloped blocks that we could be using to make this a more refined kind of looking thing. It's just to illustrate that, you know, all the shapes are made up out of lines in a voxel world, and all of those lines are made up out of cubes, even if you're using blocks that fit in a cube space but don't look like a cube. So then we get the 45-degree angles the slopes and some of the blocks that interact with those 45-degree angles. We can do with those, we can do inside corners, outside corners, hard outside corners, and then we can do a more refined 45-degree line than we could do with the cubes. Same thing with the 22.5-degree line, all the different, or some of the different options for assembling with the blocks that we're given. There's a sampling of the blocks, and just like with the last block playground, everything is color-coded. So as you're working your way through a particular line, we've got this section here showing you all of these individual blocks, and each one is a certain color, so that when you come over here, you can match the color with the block. So for example, if you look at that red skinny triangle there, sort of right dead center in the middle of the screen, and you're trying to figure out what shape that comes from, you can come back over here and see, okay, that's what we're seeing, is this sort of chamfered face. And that's how we're coming together with the different shapes and the things of that nature. So the coloring is purposeful, and it does have a meaning, and it's a very simple meaning. It's just everything lines up, everything matches colors through each line. And in those cases where we didn't have colors defined necessarily, I use alternating light and dark gray just so that you can see the transition between the blocks, because sometimes when you've got certain blocks together, there are no visible seams, or it's very difficult to find the visible seams. So by using the contrasting grays, you can see which blocks are being used in the various different positions in order to create the various different shapes. And it continues throughout the whole ship, all the way back, all kinds of different shapes. And like I say, it's not intended as a demonstration of everything that you can accomplish with these blocks. It's just a look at the blocks, how they look in the game world, an example of how they can fit together. Sometimes they're very bizarre examples, and a little bit of a blurb about each sort of collection of blocks as you work your way through. I've got a section back here for the thin blocks, which I don't think I had, or I didn't fill out as much as I could have in the last block playground. And we've got some of the blocks that weren't available, I think, at the time of the last block playground. There were a bunch of these offset 45-degree blocks and half blocks, and the really tapered sort of blocks that were released, and giving you an idea of some of the things that you can do with those. Some stepped offset kind of details, things that you can pull off very easily, but just for the sake of example, and a person can kind of wander around and get some ideas from that, and then when they're ready, they can go up the ramp. And we've got kind of an expanded section on glass. We've got the example of all three of these panes, all three different sizes. Each one still only uses one piece of glass from your inventory. So if you've got a space to fill in with glass, and you have the choice between the wee little guy and the big guy, if you're looking to save material, you choose the big guy because you get 4 times more out of it than you would with the little guy. There's also a little section here on polarity, and you can see I put this sheet in the back so that when you look, you can see all 4 of these blocks are exactly the same. They're all oriented exactly the same, but I've used the multi-tool to flip the polarity on the blocks, which is done by using the change and rotate setting on the multi-tool, and then you just zap the pane and it flips the polarity. So that's something that maybe not everybody knows, but this is an opportunity for them to see it at work. And then we've got some different glass shapes, and assembling those different glass shapes and doing things with them, and then kind of making a larger, more intricate collection, which is not to say that I would ever have something that looks like this on a ship of mine. Maybe I would, but you know, I'm not trying to say this is a fantastic example. It's just a collection of blocks that are being fit together to kind of show you, especially with the glass, because it's got some of these really kind of cool transitions between 45-degree slopes and the rounded parts. Or there's some, like this one in the back, it goes from the rounded parts to a 90-degree sort of thing that you don't find on any other blocks. So it's kind of interesting to look at those. And then lastly, in terms of examples, I just started putting together some solid blocks into various different shapes. And again, we haven't got enough colors to go through and color code each of the blocks, so I'm just using the alternating shades of gray for the contrast, so you can see the individual blocks and where they transition to a different block. as you work your way through, and as we go through we get larger and a little bit more involved to this guy here, and then just I had a little bit of room left and I was trying to figure out what to do with it, and I realized I hadn't done a whole lot with the narrow blocks, so I decided to use those. Behind all of this is a very large area for people to assemble their own stuff. They come up with an idea, they want to try some different combinations, they want to experiment with some blocks that they haven't used before. They can come back here and they can do that. It's very inexpensive because it's a small vessel chassis, which means you're not using a lot of materials to make each individual block. And if they find something that they like, they can keep it here and use it as reference. They can take this ship, if they have a mobile version, to the next build, and they have all these little references of their own ideas and their own creations that they can go back to, instead of wondering to themselves, geez, I had that great idea, now I can't remember what it was. They may have a record of it here. So that's the whole idea. It's not a complicated build, it's not intended to be, and like I say, it's not meant to be the university equivalent of building an Empyrion. It's just the sort of like the high school version. And of course, there's also the ship itself that has a few different combinations of blocks and things going on that a person could look at and maybe draw some ideas from. The glass in particular, I spent a little bit of extra time on, just kind of doing some transitions, making some shapes, making some things that I actually would use, obviously, on a design of my own if I wanted a glass environment. And I went around and I switched the polarity so that you can look from the outside in fairly easily if you wanted to kind of get a glimpse of what's going on. But once you're inside, it's all about getting down to business, because it's harder to see outside. You can't look out the window and daydream. So those are the two ships, and I should point out, in case I haven't, the interior of both ships is identical. I had actually made this ship, and I made the blueprint of this ship, and then I stripped off all of the equipment to get the unlock level down, and then I made the blueprint of that ship. So there was nothing done or changed on the interior to make them different in any way. So nobody's getting shortchanged if they choose one over the other in terms of the actual content. So that's the Block Playground version 2.0, and two of them at 2.0, with or without thrusters, depending on where you're at and what you're looking for. So that's it. That's Empyrion. 215 episodes. Seems like it was just yesterday we started, and just today, here we are, 215. So, new series is going to be starting in the next 2, maybe 3 days, and then I want to try and get back into the every other day release schedule, which I think should be a little bit easier with all new content that I can work through and kind of demonstrate various different things. And I'm going to start with small builds and work my way up as I get more and more familiar with what's available to me. So if you want to be notified about those and future videos, there's going to be even crazier stuff coming a little bit later this year, probably late spring, early summer is when we'll start off with that. Very, very different from what you're seeing here, but related in the creative, constructive kind of way. So if you want to be notified about those, the easiest way is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.